Welcome to the dark past. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always want to know how far these forgotten stories travel across the world, because tonight's story is not one you learned in school. It is a story about love, about cruelty, and about the moment a human soul is pushed beyond the point of return. In the summer of 1768, on a remote coastal plantation in the Carolinas, a young man named Elias Turner watched the woman he loved die before his eyes. And when it ended, the man he had been no longer existed. Elias had been born into bondage on the Hawthorne estate, a sprawling plantation where the ocean wind carried the scent of salt and rot across the cotton fields. Ships passed on the horizon like ghosts of freedom, always visible, never reachable. To the 80 enslaved people forced to work that land, the sea was not hope. It was a reminder of the world that would never belong to them. Elias was 19 when Lila arrived. She came in winter, thin from travel, silent from loss. Fever had taken her family on a Virginia plantation, and she had been sold south like unwanted cargo. But even in grief, there was something unbroken in her spirit. She worked without complaint. She spoke gently, and sometimes, when no overseer watched, she smiled. Love between the enslaved did not begin with grand declarations. It began in small mercies, a shared drink of water, a whispered word in the fields, a hand brushed in passing. By spring, Elias and Lila found ways to be near each other. By summer, they made a promise. "We should bind ourselves before God," Elias whispered one evening beside the cabins, their voices hidden beneath the sound of insects. "If not before men, then at least in heaven." Lila's fingers tightened around his. "Master Hawthorne won't allow it," she said quietly. "He's been asking about me, about children, about my strength." Elias understood what that meant. On plantations like Hawthorne's, love meant nothing. Marriage meant nothing. Women were valued for what their bodies could produce, not for the hearts they carried. "Then we don't ask," Elias murmured. "Old Jonah can speak the words. Sunday night, quietly." Lila hesitated, then nodded. But secrets did not live long on Hawthorne land. Someone overheard, and on Sunday night, when lanterns glowed faintly and the enslaved gathered in a circle while old Jonah began the sacred words, the door burst open. Master Hawthorne stepped inside. He was not tall, but cruelty made him seem towering. His coat still smelled of tobacco and wine, his eyes sharp with rage. "What is this?" he demanded. No one spoke. His gaze fell on Lila. "So," he said softly, "you thought you could give yourself away without my permission." Elias stepped forward. "Sir, we only wished." "You wished?" Hawthorne snapped. "You have no wishes. You are property. Property does not choose." Lila tried to speak, but Hawthorne struck her across the face, sending her to the floor. Something inside Elias moved before thought could stop it. He stepped between them. The entire room froze. Hawthorne's lips curled into a slow, terrible smile. "Well," he said, "now I have reason." By morning, the entire plantation stood in the yard. Elias was tied to the whipping frame. Lila was forced to stand at the front so she could see every strike. The lash tore into his back again and again, splitting skin, drawing blood, breaking breath. He tried not to scream. He failed. By the 40th lash, he was barely conscious. Still, he begged them to let Lila look away. They refused. When it ended, Hawthorne approached her slowly. "You see what love brings?" he asked. Lila, trembling, raised her head. "I still love him," she whispered. The words sealed her fate. Without anger, without shouting, Hawthorne ordered the overseers to drag her to the horse trough near the stables. Elias tried to stand. He could not. He watched as Hawthorne forced her head beneath the water. She struggled. She clawed. She tried to breathe. And when Hawthorne finally let go, she did not rise again. The wind moved through the yard. No one spoke. Something inside Elias shattered in that moment, something deeper than grief. Something final. That night, as he lay bleeding in darkness, one truth settled in his mind like iron. The man he had been died beside her, and whatever lived now would never again belong to fear. The first sound Samson heard that morning wasn't the ocean. It was breathing. His own. Ragged. Uneven. Alive. For a long moment he lay still on the cave floor, staring at the thin beam of sunlight creeping across the stone. He didn't remember falling asleep. He didn't remember how long he'd been unconscious. Only the pain told him he hadn't died. And the pain was everywhere. His back burned like fire pressed into skin. Every movement sent waves of agony through his ribs. Salt had dried in his wounds, leaving them stiff and swollen. When he tried to sit up, black spots crowded his vision. He almost wished he had drowned. But then he remembered Sarah, the trough, the water, her hands clawing for air. Samson forced himself upright. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." Outside, the island breathed with its own rhythm. Waves folded gently against rock. Wind combed through low trees. Birds screamed overhead, sharp and indifferent. Life went on here. Whether he lived or died meant nothing to the island. That realization struck him harder than the whip ever had. For the first time since the storm, Samson truly looked around. The cave was larger than he'd realized. The pirate supplies he'd found the night before lay scattered in dust. The rusted blade, the spyglass, the cracked chest, coils of brittle rope. Proof that other men had once stood here and survived. If they could live here, so could he. He crawled toward the cave entrance, dragging one leg behind him, and squinted out toward the ocean. The mainland was a thin gray shadow on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Beaumont was eating breakfast, laughing, sleeping peacefully in a bed built on stolen lives. Samson felt something stir inside him, not grief this time, something colder. He pulled himself fully into the light. The island was small, yes, but not empty. Wild figs clung to twisted branches. Tide pools glimmered between rocks, filled with darting silver fish. The smell of damp earth suggested fresh water nearby. This wasn't a grave. It was a test. He found the spring not far from the cave, hidden beneath roots and moss. The water was clear and cold, running from stone like something sacred. He drank until his stomach rebelled, then drank again. Every swallow felt like a bargain with life. For 3 days, Samson did nothing but survive. He gathered fallen fruit, cracked open crabs against rocks, slept through fevers that turned the world into flickering nightmares. Sometimes he heard Sarah's voice in the wind. Sometimes he heard Beaumont's laughter. Once, in the middle of the night, he woke convinced the ocean was calling him back, promising peace if he just walked into it. But each time, he stayed. By the 4th morning, the fever loosened its grip. Samson stood at the mouth of the cave, weak but upright, and watched the sunrise paint the sea in dull gold. The light stretched toward him like a path. He realized something then. If the ocean had wanted him dead, it would have finished the job. Instead, it had carried him here, given him shelter, given him tools, given him time. Samson lifted the spyglass and aimed it toward the mainland. It took him a moment to steady his shaking hands. When the lens finally aligned, he saw the faint outline of sails moving along the coast. Ships, routes, patterns. A thought formed slowly. Not escape. Not yet. Something else. He lowered the spyglass, his jaw tightening. "You took everything from me," he said quietly, as if Beaumont could hear him across the water. "But you forgot one thing." The wind carried his words out over the sea. "You forgot to kill me." For the first time since Sarah's death, Samson felt a direction forming. Not hope, not forgiveness, but purpose. This island wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of Beaumont's. By the winter of 1786, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place that was waiting for footsteps, waiting for a confession, waiting for something buried to rise. Edmund began sleeping poorly. The wind pushed through the shutters each night, and the old beams creaked like someone shifting their weight in the halls. More than once he woke certain he had heard a door open downstairs. But each time he checked, the house was still, except for the study. He avoided that room now. Since the night he had found the journal, something in him resisted crossing its threshold. He told himself it was foolishness. Ink and paper could not haunt a man, yet every time he passed the door, he felt a heaviness in his chest, as if the room itself knew what he had read. 3 days before Christmas, a letter arrived. No seal, no return name. Only his full title written in careful ink. To Edmund Hale, keeper of the Ashfield estate. He frowned at the wording. No one called him that. Inside was a single page. The handwriting matched the journal. His fingers trembled before he finished the first line. "If you have read what was left behind, then you already know this house does not belong to you. He stopped breathing. The letter continued. Your father did not inherit Ashfield. He acquired it, and he was warned what it would cost. Edmund felt the room tilt slightly. He sat down before his legs failed him. There was an agreement made in the year of 1752. It was not written in law, but in promise. Each generation would keep the truth buried. Each generation would keep the door closed. Your father broke neither rule, but you have already broken the first. Edmund's hand tightened around the page. If the door is opened again, the house will demand its balance, and the debt will not be paid in coin. The final line was smaller, almost hesitant. Leave before the year turns, or you will not leave at all. He stared at the words for a long time. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow brushed the windows like fingertips. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as a cruel jest, but he could not ignore the truth sitting in his lap. Someone knew what he had found. Someone knew about the journal, and someone believed this house carried a debt. That evening, Edmund forced himself into the study. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house. The desk stood where he had left it. The hidden panel was still open, the journal resting inside. But something was different. The drawer beneath it, the one he had never noticed before, was slightly ajar. He pulled it open slowly. Inside lay a folded document, brittle with age, a contract, signed by his father, signed by a man named Thomas Whitlock, and beneath the signatures, a single sentence written in darker ink. The house shall remain standing, provided the door beneath it is never opened again. Edmund's pulse thundered in his ears. The cellar. He had passed that locked door countless times as a child. He remembered being told never to go near it. He remembered how his father's voice had changed when he asked why. Not angry, afraid. Edmund closed his eyes. For the first time, the unease he felt was not vague or imagined. It had shape now. History, consequence, and a choice. He could leave, abandon the estate, sell it, walk away before whatever promise bound his family tightened around him. Or he could finally open the door his father had spent a lifetime keeping shut. That night, Edmund stood at the top of the cellar stairs. The iron key hung heavy in his hand. Below him, darkness pooled like ink. For a long time, he did not move. But curiosity, once awakened, rarely sleeps again. And slowly, he began to descend. The air changed with every step Edmund took downward. At the top of the cellar stairs, the house still sounded alive, wind against stone, timber sighing in the cold. But halfway down, those sounds faded, swallowed by a silence so complete it pressed against his ears. The iron key trembled slightly in his hand. He told himself it was only the cold. At the bottom, the corridor stretched ahead, narrow and low. The stone walls glistened with damp, and the smell of earth was stronger here, as though the house had roots buried deep below the soil. The locked door stood at the far end. It was smaller than he remembered. Plain, almost ordinary. That was what unsettled him most. For decades, this door had been treated like the boundary between worlds, and yet it looked like any other cellar door. Rough wood, iron hinges, a simple lock. Edmund stood before it, listening. Nothing. No wind, no movement, no sound at all. He slid the key into the lock. For a moment, it refused to turn. He almost took it as a sign to stop. But then the metal shifted with a dull click, echoing down the corridor like a distant knock. Edmund exhaled slowly and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, not loudly but long, as if the door had not moved in years and resented the effort. Beyond it lay a chamber carved directly into the earth. No furniture, no barrels, no stored supplies, only a single stone platform in the center of the room. And on it, a chest, small, dark, bound in iron. Edmund stepped closer, each footfall stirring dust that had not been disturbed for decades. The chamber felt heavier than the rest of the cellar, the air thick and unmoving. He stopped beside the chest. It was unlocked. His throat tightened. Someone had sealed this place for generations. Yet whatever lay inside had never been meant to be hidden forever, only delayed. He opened it. Inside lay no gold, no documents, no heirlooms, only bones, not arranged carefully, not buried with respect, simply placed inside, wrapped in what had once been cloth but had long since rotted away. And atop them rested a silver locket. Edmund's breath caught. He lifted it slowly, brushing away dust. The hinge creaked as he opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait, a young woman, painted with delicate care, dark hair, steady eyes, a face neither smiling nor sorrowful, but calm in a way that felt almost knowing. On the inner lid, words were etched into the metal. She was never meant to be forgotten. Edmund felt the room tilt around him. The journal, the letter, the contract, it all pointed here. A life erased, a promise made to keep that erasure intact, and a family bound to silence in exchange for keeping their estate, and perhaps their safety. A faint sound reached him then, not from the corridor, from above, a floorboard shifting. Edmund froze. Another sound followed, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the hall overhead. But he lived alone. The realization struck him like cold water. The house was no longer waiting. It was responding. Edmund closed the locket, his pulse hammering. For the first time since arriving at Ashfield, fear replaced curiosity entirely. Some doors were meant to stay closed, not because of what they hid, but because of what they woke. He backed toward the cellar stairs, clutching the locket tightly. Above him, the footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then from somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed shut. Edmund did not wait to learn which one. He turned and climbed, faster than dignity allowed, the dark corridor swallowing the chamber behind him. And as he reached the top step, he understood something with terrible clarity. The house had kept its secret for decades. Now it expected him to do the same. Edmund did not sleep that night. He sat in the study until dawn, the silver locket resting on the desk before him, its surface catching the weak glow of the fire. Every creak of the house felt louder now. Every shifting shadow seemed to watch him. He had spent weeks searching for answers. Now he had them, and they were heavier than he had imagined. The woman in the portrait was not just a forgotten figure from the past. She had been part of the family's history, not through marriage, not through title, but through something far more dangerous. Love, hidden love, forbidden love. And when that love threatened inheritance, reputation, and the fragile alliances that kept a state standing in the 18th century, it had been erased. Not quietly, not kindly. The bones in the chest had not been placed there in grief. They had been hidden in fear. Edmund rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing in. The journal's final pages replayed in his mind, the trembling handwriting of his ancestor, the admission of a decision made for the survival of the house, a decision that had chained every generation after him to silence. Outside, pale morning light seeped through the window, washing the room in gray. For a moment, Edmund considered doing what his family had always done, closing the cellar, locking the door, returning the key to its place. Let the past stay buried. Let the house keep its secrets. It would be easy. No one would know. But then he looked at the locket again. She was never meant to be forgotten. Those words did not feel like a warning anymore. They felt like a request. Edmund rose slowly and crossed the room. From a drawer, he removed paper, ink, and the family seal, tools that had once preserved silence. Today, they would record truth. He began to write. Not a confession, not an apology, a history. He wrote her name first carefully, so it would never vanish again. He wrote what had been done to her, and why. He wrote of the fear that had ruled the house for generations, and of the cost of protecting reputation over humanity. By the time the sun rose fully, his hand ached, but the pages were complete. For the first time since arriving, the house felt lighter, not warm, not welcoming, but no longer suffocating. Edmund carried the pages to the cellar himself. He opened the chamber once more, but this time he did not hesitate. He placed the written record beside the chest and laid the locket gently atop it. A memorial, at last. Then he sealed the chamber again, not to hide the truth, but to preserve it. When he stepped back into the corridor, the air felt different, not heavy, not watching, simply still, as though the house had finally exhaled. Weeks later, Edmund would leave Ashfield behind. The estate would pass to distant relatives, and the written record would be entrusted to the town archives, where it could no longer be erased. The house would remain, but its silence would no longer be a lie, and perhaps that was the only peace the past ever allowed. Stories like this remind us that history is not only built by kings and wars, but by the secrets families choose to bury. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten corners of the past, consider supporting the channel with a like and subscribing. It helps bring more hidden histories into the light, one story at a time. And if this tale made you wonder, how many old houses still remember what their walls were forced to keep quiet? Tell me in the comments.